Okay, good morning, everyone. We're going to be starting today's class. Okay, so today's class, we have quite a bit to cover. So it's going to be quite a detailed class, just because of the fact that we've got a lot of ground on file handling and management. So what we're going to do is I'm not going to manage the chat because we've got Mazir in the chat. So you guys have done a good job in the last couple of weeks managing each other in the chat with answers and responses. But at one time, I'm going to be focusing on lecturing rather than looking at the chat so much. So you guys, by all means, assist yourselves in the chat. I'll do my best to also manage that as well. But let's get into file handling and management. So a couple of things that are obviously the next level and evolution from what you guys have done previously is actually reading and writing to files, right? So now what we're going to have is the ability to save information, right, somewhere. So not just so much having a static website, but also having information stored somewhere for retrieval. So what we're going to do today is understand the syntax and the functions used to read and write the files in PHP, how to create, modify, and delete files and directories. That's important too. How to implement error handling, because you might have a file that doesn't exist, or you might have a directory that doesn't exist. Managing file permissions, right? Because you might not have the right permission to write to the directory or write to the file or whatnot. Use advanced file handling functions such as file locking and stream handling, okay? Reading and writing structured data formats like CSV and JSON. So not just text in a boring way. It's also going to be just, structured formats that you can easily do something with, right? CSV is comma separated values. So meaning that the delimiter is a comma, so you can break apart the data. JSON is a key value, right? So all these different formats are going to be there that we're going to learn. Handle file uploads and process file data in web applications. So again, what happens when a file is uploaded? How do you process that? How do you move it from a temporary directory to a permanent directory? And adopt cross-platform file handling practices, right? So not only something that you are using on Linux, but also on Windows or Mac, those sort of things. So all of this corresponds to chapter 6 in the textbook. So if you've not seen chapter 6, you need to be on top of it. Okay, so we've got quite a bit to cover just on 17 slides, and this is only slide 2. So let's get going. So file handling is managed using a function called fopen. Okay, so this opens a file and returns a file pointer. Okay, so this pointer then is used by the file functions, other ones like file read, file write, file close. So let's just kind of dive into it, right? Basic syntax, again, it's going to be fopen. You're going to pass in the file name, the mode. You have an optional use include path and resource context. So we're going to walk through what all these parameters mean because you need to know all this, right? So file name, the first parameter, is the path to the file you want to open. So if it doesn't exist, the file open will actually behave differently depending on the mode used. So mode, the next one, is a parameter that specifies the type of access you require. So you might need read, you might need write, and we'll get into some other ones eventually too. But if I'm gonna just simply consume data, if I want to just read what's in the file, I'm not going to choose write. I'm going to just choose read only, right? So again, your business logic will dictate what it is you're looking for. Use include path is a Boolean value that, if set to true, allows the function to search for the file in the include path, which is PHP's include directory, right? So default is false. The context parameter is also optional. It's a context stream resource created with the stream context create function, and it modifies the behavior of the file pointer, such as timeout, SSL settings, etc. Okay, so this is often for advanced file handling scenarios. So again, you need to be on top of not only documentation on php.net, So, because we're just covering this just so you guys are gonna get a sort of a taste of how this works, but you have to practice this. You cannot just rely on the lecture alone to understand all of this. So now we have the return value. So it returns a resource, which is a file pointer handle. Okay. So it's kind of just a little, in layman's terms, it's a reference to that object in a sense almost on success, which will be used by other file functions like we talked about earlier, the read, the write, right? If the file open fails, it returns false, right? Indicating the operation was unsuccessful. So, and that could be not found, incorrect permissions, whatnot. So we talked about this just briefly here. Why use different modes? So we have R plus, W plus, A plus, X plus, all these, right? So what are these modes and why do I need them? So they read, write, append, and creation behavior, right? So here's some just real life scenarios we put together for you. So read only, okay, opens an existing file for reading. So you want to use this, as the example says, when you're reading a configuration file, right? So if you have just something you want to know what some settings are, right? Let's say you have maybe font size or username or those sort of things. This is where you just want read only, right? And then this is how you would execute the code, right? So you check first, you call file open on config.ini, that's the file name itself. I'm going to choose R for read. And by the way, I'm going to quickly just start recording. I forgot to
Recording
record
in
here.
progress.
So in read-only mode, we're opening the file. We get the handle of it in this file variable. If file exists, right, we're going to loop through with a while loop each line, and we're going to get until basically it doesn't equal false. And we're going to echo each line. So this is just simply looping through, and we're going to then echo each line of the file, right? So we're not really doing any business logic here. We're just simply, spinning through the file and echoing out what we find. Read write, which is R plus, opens an existing file for both reading and writing, and it's used when you want to read the file and make specific modifications. For example, updating user settings, right? So now in this case, you want to read maybe the person's last login time. So maybe there's a setting in the settings.txt file that says Adam's last login, right? That was 2 days ago, right? Now you want to update that last login to today. So you're going to need a R plus, which is a read and write. So the example here is, again, we open the file, we check if it exists or we open successfully. We're going to read the contents. And again, we're going to replace mode off with mode equals on, right? Again, this is just a very specific example in terms of like a INI format. So there's, again, you can make this in any different way or shape or form. This is just using INI. And so this is how you would write that file, right? This is one example of how to write that file. The key here is more I'm trying to teach you guys all of the different options, not so much how specifically we're coding it. So write only opens a file for writing only, right? If the file exists, it will be truncated to 0 length. And you want to use this mode when creating new reports or overwriting outdated logs, right? So keep in mind that this is different from read plus, right? And then there's read write, which is W plus. It opens a file for reading and writing. And if the file exists, it is truncated to 0 length. If it doesn't exist, a new file is created. So note that that didn't exist above here, right? So use this mode for refreshing configuration files, right? So again, you check if it exists, you write this certain specific config parameter you want to write. You can echo it to the screen that you wrote it, and then you close the file. And then there's append, which opens a file for writing only, okay? This is interesting because it appends new content to the end. So this is good if you want to have a log file while keeping the previous entries intact. So let's say, again, let's say it's browsing history. You went to CNN.com, you went to Google.com, you went to Facebook.com. You want to keep track. Like if you're creating a web browser, append is great because now you can, at the end of each file, append the new data, right? So in this case, I'm opening the file. and I'm writing a line, which is today's date, year, month, day, hour, minute, second, user login detected, right? So like when the user logged in, I'm writing to the end of the file this row that says this person logged in, right? Otherwise, unable to append the file in the case of any issues. Then there's read, write, append, which is A plus. So this one opens a file for both reading and writing, appending content to the end, and use this mode to maintain an up-to-date transaction file. Okay, so this is reading and writing. Again, same thing. You've got some sort of data here you want to write, and you can move the pointer to the beginning to read all the entries. So you can actually write and also read as well. Then there's also write only exclusive, which creates a new file for writing only. So it'll fail if the file already exists, and it's used to create files safely without overwriting existing ones, right? So meaning that if there's an existing one, it will fail, right? So you want to make sure your business case matches this, right? So you want to only use this if you have exclusively a new file you want to create and not overwrite and touch anything. And then there's read write exclusive plus, which creates a new file for reading and writing, and it fails if the file already exists. And this is when you're creating new configuration files for future editing. Okay, so that's a lot to take in. I know this is probably quite overwhelming for a lot of you, but I'm not going to go through all the discussion questions because we simply just don't have the time. But let's just ask the team this one here. So which mode would you choose to safely create a new file without overwriting existing content? So which is the append though? Append is, what is the mode? Okay, so X is the correct answer there. Okay, all right. Moving on. So now reading files in PHP with fread and fgets. So there's multiple ways to read a file in PHP. The two most common are going to be fread and fgets. So they both serve different purposes. So the syntax for these is going to be fread has a resource handle and a length, and fgets has a resource handle and also a length optional, right? So let's explain that. So we've got handle, right? So you have a file pointer obtained from fopen, right? And the length of this one here is the maximum number of bytes to read from the file. So in fread, this value determines the total number of characters to read. And in fgets, the length is omitted. It will read at the end of the file. So that's why the difference here is one you can choose and one it just does at the end of the file. So in fread, the return value returns the file content read up to the length or until end of file, okay? And in this fgets version, it returns a single line of text up to length bytes or until a new line is encountered, right? So note that the new line character /n at the end of each line is preserved in the return string. So that's a big distinction right there, right? So one is you can just read everything, and one is just a line, right? So how do you use them? So you use fread when you want to read a specific number of bytes from a file for like a fixed length, as an example. And fgets when you want to read files line by line. So if you want to go through, let's say, a log file or configuration file, if you guys remember from the first couple of lessons, we had php.ini, which has a ton of configuration settings. So that's an example where you can have a perfect example of fgets because you can go through line by line, right? So that's something to consider. Now, fixed length record, sorry. So is a data structure where each record in a file has a predefined length. So for example, you might have 100 bytes per record. So this is commonly used in systems where consistent record size is necessary for fast file access and easy manipulation. So for example, in database export, each row might be exactly 100 bytes, allowing for direct record access. So again, you might see this more in maybe more legacy systems. Maybe if you work for some sort of banking system where back in the day, they had like fixed rank length records. I haven't seen it too much in the real world, but you need to know how to deal with it, right? So again, that's the example of how to do that. And all this exact lecture document is all available for you guys on D2L as well. So I'm not going to get into too much of the nitty-gritty line by line code. Otherwise, we're never going to get through the slides. So there's an example of how to read it with fgets, and then there's an example of fread as well. So if we have a file where each employee record is exactly 50 bytes, you can also do the same thing with fread, right? You can just say file 50. So let's say, for example, is there a situation where fread might be inefficient? Does anybody know? Why would fread be ever inefficient? Like, can anybody think of an example? But that's not answering the question though, right? So Samuel, when you only want to read one line, you are correct in the sense that your business case is you want to read a line, but why is it inefficient? You know what I mean? So that's more of a business reason, but not so much from an efficiency standpoint. So why would fread be more inefficient? So think of it in the sense that what does fread do, right? fread reads the whole thing, right? So naturally, if you're reading the whole file, Blend, you're kind of onto something, but you're not exactly there yet. Just think of resources, right? So think of in a sense of right now the files are a little Mickey Mouse size, right? If you're searching for particular info, yeah, Omar, I think you're on the right track too. It comes down to right now, file might be a couple of kilobytes, right? But what happens if this file is gigabytes or terabytes? Imagine you have one single file, like a database dump or some sort of backup, which is like 20 gigs. It's going to take the computer forever to read 20 gigs. It doesn't matter if you're on a supercomputer or not, you know? You're basically bogging down the whole system to read like a 10 gig text file, right? So in that case, you don't want to go through, and that's kind of where you guys are all correct. You don't want to go through this whole arduous, pain of having to like read an entire 10 gig file because no matter what, it's going to take some time. Like on the fastest computer with the fastest drives, you know. So using it in a loop would using it in a loop make the whole file be read every time? Are you talking about, Ricky, the fgets or fread? So fread, yeah, it would read the whole file every time, right? So if you have like a 10 gig file, it's going to be insane. Like you're just never gonna, this is going to take forever. So imagine if you have, again, you built the next Instagram, right? And now every time somebody visits the website, every single visit, you're reading like a 10 gig file, your computers will crash. Like the servers will just crash. You won't even handle any traffic, right? So that's why, again, it's different tool for different jobs. So you're not going to use a samurai sword to cut some bread, right? So depending on what you're using it for, fread might be good if you're doing some sort of batch processing where like once a year you have to go through this gigantic 20 gig file and do some work on it. And it doesn't matter if it's going to take hours, but every time somebody comes to your Instagram competitor website, it's completely inefficient, right? There's just no way to do it. So again, different tool for different jobs, right? So yeah, good answers, guys. So now file handling with fwrite. Let's talk about that. So the fwrite function is used to write data to the file. So it allows for more control of the writing process, making it useful for appending data or working with binary files. That's another one too. So fwrite, we have a resource, which is a handle, and then we have a string and a length. So what are they? So the handle is a pointer resource obtained from file open, just like we saw earlier. The string is going to be the string we're writing to the file, and the length optional is the maximum number of bytes to write. So if it's omitted, then the whole string is written. So the syntax is basically fopen, you open the file in terms of write mode, then you say fwrite, the handle we have here, hello world. And again, we didn't pass a length, so we just write the whole thing into the file, and then we close it, right? So that's it. Simple as that, right? Opens example.txt and writes hello world, and closes it. So appending data to a log file, which this is probably gonna be one of the more common things you guys are gonna do in the future, is, we have a log file. Let's say it's an error log. So you want to know, for example, what time the error happened. So you want to typically write down, some sort of year, month, date, hour, minute, second, and then the error itself, right? Now, this could be improved further by adding the user that's trying to do this, whether you're logged in or not, the browser you're trying to do this on, the time zone, because again, your server time zone could be different from your local computer time zone. So this implies a certain time zone on the PHP configuration. But again, to make it easier for you to parse through all this in the future, there's a lot of things you can improve on it, right? And you might not necessarily want to output this as a string. You might want to get this message from an error object itself, right? But again, the whole idea is, for appending purposes, you want to append this to each file. So we're going to open this with A. Then we have some other examples, writing JSON data. So if you guys ever work with JSON data, JSON is its own structure. So let's just quickly JSON example. I'm sure you guys have seen JSON data before, but this is kind of like, a little example of it, right? So you've got menu, inside that we have ID, value. So it's a key value. It's also kind of like an array, right? Like for example, widget here, we have debug is on, and then the window itself has another object which contains title, a name, a width, height. Our image object contains, again, source, that's the image source, name. So this is JSON, right? It's different from what we were just doing before right now, which is an ini file. So ini file example looks something like this, where you have, the title, which is like, let's say owner, and then you have name equals, the name, organization equals organization. And there's not really any kind of nesting involved. You can't say like this child belongs to this parent, like you could in a JSON file, right? In a JSON file, this image belongs to the widget, right? So this text and this image are all kind of nested underneath, right? So going back to our lecture here, writing JSON data to a file. Now what we can do is we can create a data array. We have name, John, age, 30, city, Toronto, right? And then we have a handle for writing. And then there's a special function called JSON encode, which takes that array and actually then puts that into the file as a JSON format. Okay, so that's basically the JSON handling. Now, what happens if fwrite is used without opening the file in write mode? What happens then? Can anybody tell me? Anybody know? No data will be written. Okay. So, is that the final answer? So the fwrite, if it's used without opening the file in write mode, it will produce an error because the file pointer is not set up for writing operations, right? Okay. All right, moving on. So file handling, fputs CSV. You can imagine already from the title alone what this is going to be. So fput CSV is used to format a line as a CSV. If you've never seen a CSV, I'm going to quickly show you guys CSV example. I'm pretty sure you guys have all seen a CSV though. But basically, it looks like this if you open it in Excel. It has nice rows and columns, but the actual data itself is like this, right? So you've got name, comma, birthday, comma, birthplace, comma, sex, which is again, that could be your header row. And there's no like definitive rule that you need a header row or not. But that in this case, I can tell by looking at it as a header row. And then I've got the values underneath. So each row corresponds to data. So Chris Pratt, comma, that's the first column there. And then we've got 6/21/79. That's the birth date, right? Virginia, da 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 da. And you can notice that the comma here is not the delimiter because it's surrounded in double quotes, right? Kima, that's a good point. So what I'll do is I'll ask Maziar to put that up ahead of time. So yeah, appreciate you bringing that up. Okay. So that is the CSV. So what we're going to do is we're going to write CSV to the file, right? So again, we have a handle, we have a fields, which is an array of values to be written as a CSV row. So now we know what a CSV row looks like. So this could be, Chris Pratt, that's the data, comma, 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 right? So that's our array of values written as a CSV row. A delimiter, in a CSV, the delimiter is the comma, but believe it or not, you can actually have something like a TSV, which is a tab separated value. So you can make the comma a pipe. You can make it's really up to you. I mean, the point is you just need a delimiter, right? Something that you're not going to really have in your data. So moving back to the CSV file, you could, instead of comma, have like $, $, like $3 is the delimiter, right? So that's a possibility too. So the enclosure character default is double quote. Again, that's where we're talking about if I put something in double quotes and then there's commas there, it knows that it's going to ignore that. That's not going to be a delimiter, right? And then the escape character, right? Typically a backslash. So the length is returned. So length of the written string or false on failure, right? So again, simple example here is opening data.csv for write. We're going to fput CSV name, age, city. So that's our header row. And then we're going to put John Doe 25 New York. That's our next row after that. And then we close it, right? And then we end up with a file that looks something like this. So now exporting user data to a CSV file. So here's another example now. Let's say we have a users array, right? So we have a nice little array. Again, the same thing. We can do a for each loop through the users, fput CSV, boom. And then now we've got this nice output of a CSV file, right? So you notice that all of this is kind of one and the same, right? It really doesn't matter. The data is the most important thing, not so much the format. So you are the kind of architect. It's up to you and the business rules to say, do I need a CSV? Do I need a JSON? Or do I need a regular text file, right? Like it's not up to me, it's up to you, right? It's up to the requirements. Like what fits this, what's the best tool for the job, right? If you're gonna go for a 1 kilometer distance, is it better to take a bicycle? Is it better to take a car or a helicopter or an airplane? If you're going 1 kilometer, you're not going to take an airplane, right? So same thing. If you need certain data in a certain way with a lot of relationships, maybe JSON is a good example, right? If you're writing data that's kind of like in this format where it's going to be read in Excel and have some stuff done to it, most likely CSV is a good example, right? Like that's a good tool for the job. So you can also do this with an associative array with headers. So you've got our associative array here, right? And then again, we can now write this out over here because now in the associative array, we have name, John Doe, age, 30, city, Toronto, right? So notice here, we're taking the headers, right? Writing that out, and then we write the rows, right? And then even things like multidimensional arrays. So we have the ability to have, ID1, name Alice, courses, and then now notice courses now it's also has an array of math and physics, right? Chemistry, biology. So you can actually now write this data to a CSV file because you loop through each multi-array as a record. And then we go to the courses, we basically extract that, we separate it out, convert the array to a string, and then we plop that out, right? So there's a lot of complexity that you can do here. It's not just simply write some text to a file and off you go, right? There's a lot of funny business and lots of interesting things you can do. Special characters like commas, quotes, and new lines can cause issues, like I talked about earlier. So the enclosure parameter to wrap fields that contain special characters and set the appropriate escape character is important. So in this case, you've got uses double quotes and commas. What you want to do is you want to make sure you set the delimiter, enclosure, and escape character. In this case, could be comma and double quote, right? So you want to know how to handle these situations. And again, this can get very complicated really fast. Again, just note how to do this. We're not going to go through every single line by line. We just simply don't have the time. Now, the last one is appending data to an existing CSV file, right? So again, simple example, you get the data, and now we're opening it with fputs CSV as an append mode, right? So how does the enclosure parameter affect fields that contain commas? Does anybody know? How does the enclosure parameter affect fields that contain commas? So think of what it does, right? The enclosure parameter, it wraps, right? Special characters are wrapped in the specified enclosure, right? So you're wrapping those characters in an enclosure, and it prevents them from being misinterpreted, right? That's the key. Okay. Reading data from a CSV file using fgets. So now we're kind of flipping this on its head. And now we're not writing anymore, now we're reading it. So again, the same thing. I'm not going to go through this. This is all the same, right? We get a return value, which is an array of fields read from the CSV, or false if no more data. So how does it look? I got students.csv. I do an fopen while the handle doesn't equal false. Loop through each line in the CSV file. So we're going to say while data get fget CSV, right? And then we echo, because now we're getting it back as an array. Data 0, data 1, data 2. So it comes back as a nice little array for each line. And then we just simply display that on the screen. And now notice here, I'm displaying it in the format that I choose, which is I can put a comma here, I can put the word age, I can put a space after the colon, I can do some HTML. So now I'm taking this raw, call it not dirty, but just kind of unformatted, just plain data, and I can add all kinds of stuff to it, right? I can echo out styles, I can add, whatever. It's up to me, right? So the script reads the CSV file and then outputs the values for each record. So now reading it with a custom delimiter is another example, right? So read CSV file using a semicolon as a delimiter. So in this case, what we're saying is we're going to use this delimiter of semicolon, right? And now everything is broken out based on semicolon, right? So do you guys have any real world scenarios where fget CSV could be used? So not just imaginary, school scenarios, but what's a real world scenario? We did talk about this earlier this morning. There's some good examples there. So think of where you'd work, right? Analyze a bank statement, yeah. Right. So bank records, if you guys have ever had to do taxes or anything, or download from TD Bank or RBC, CIBC, usually you get the data in a CSV format, right? So any kind of financial record, that's a really good example. Transaction history, because the bank doesn't care to make it pretty, right? They're not going to give you this beautifully colored, nice font. They're giving you just data. Like, here's all your transactions. Trades are a good example too, right? And stock trades. Nobody cares about it looking pretty and pink and having all kinds of like nice images on it. It's just raw data. Here's your stocks and here's your transactions and trades. Yeah, yeah, exactly. Even things like stores, right? E-commerce, right? Like, who bought what today? Like, what if you have an Amazon store and you're selling, 10,000 products a day? You just need a dump of all those products, right? Yeah, so good examples, guys. All right. So now file writing, fput contents. So it's a function which is a convenient and efficient way to write data to a file, right? So it combines several steps: open, write, and close into a single operation. That's the key here, right? Making it a simpler alternative to fopen and fwrite when dealing with the key here, small files, not big files, small files, right? So again, what are my parameters? I've got a file name, right? If it doesn't exist, PHP will actually create it for you. The data to be written to the file could be a string, an array, or a stream resource. Optional flags, which is how the function behaves. So for example, I want to append the file, lock the file, ignore the past search, And then we have context, which is a context resource for modifying the behavior of the stream. Again, optional. So the flags are going to be file, use, include path. So search for the file in the include path, right? If I pass that in, file append. If the file already exists, append the data instead of overwriting, because obviously you don't necessarily want to overwrite every time. And then lock underscore ex, it requires an exclusive lock on the file while writing to prevent simultaneous writes. So imagine you and 10 other people are trying to write to the same file. Who wins, right? So in that case, you're in this sort of deadlock scenario. So what you're saying is, give me an exclusive on the file to prevent other people from writing at the same time, right? The return value is going to be the number of bytes written to the file, and if an error, you get false. Again, very common, similar sort of thing. So writing a simple string is as easy as saying file, put contents, example.txt, simple string. Easy, right? One line, one shot. This will create or overwrite the example.txt file and store the string. Now, appending the data, all we're doing here is we're saying this is the additional line, file append, which is what we saw here earlier, right, on the flags, file append. And then writing an array to a file, again, same thing, we have an array, and then we're just saying print r, because using print r with the second parameter set to true allows you to convert an array to a readable string. So there's another print r, which again, if you guys Google it, you'd have to kind of know this in advance, but it displays information about the variable in a way that's readable to humans. And then the second is if you would like to return the data, right? Rather than just print it to the screen. So in this case, you're saying, yes, return the data instead of just printing it, because otherwise, if you don't put the true, it actually won't come back. You won't be able to use it. And then we have writing with a lock, which is write a string to a locked text file with an exclusive lock. So again, same thing, locked file. This is a locked file and lock ex. So this writes to the locked file.txt, ensuring no other script can simultaneously write to it using an exclusive lock. Okay. So what happens if you try to write to a file that is in another process? Does anybody know from their past experience? Anybody know? So if you guys are both writing at the same time, right, without proper locking, it might overwrite. It might get blocked. You might even get like a corruption. Like you might even corrupt the thing, right? So it's kind of like you might get some unexpected behavior, basically. Let's put it that way. So does anybody know how this prevents file corruption then? How does that prevent file corruption? So one access at a time. Yeah, basically what we talked about, right? Yeah, exactly. You guys are good. Okay, it's 10:51. We have to take a break, so I will see you guys back at 11:01 or 11:02, and we'll continue on the remaining 10 slides. So we'll see you guys in a sec. Okay. All right, welcome back. So let's continue on. All right, so we have the file put contents. Now what we're going to do is we're going to cover file get contents, which, as you can imagine, is for reading the file. So file get contents is one of the most versatile because it's just, again, makes it really easy, right? So it reads the entire file into a string, useful for reading content in one go. And it can even read from a URL given the correct PHP configuration settings, which is really interesting. So let's quickly just jump through the parameters. The file name, which is a path or URL. So you can actually put in like Instagram.com or something. Use include path. If true, the function will search for the file in the include path. Context, a valid context resource using stream context create. Again, we'll show you some examples there. Offset is the starting point of reading in bytes, so you can start at a later bytes. And max length, right? Again, super simple. So reading files from URLs. So by default, this is used to read files locally. However, you can also read from URLs by enabling allow URL fopen in the PHP ini file. So in PHP ini, you want to set this as on, and then you can actually read from files. So, sorry, from URL. And then reading from a local file is as simple as having just a file name path, right? And then just call that, and then the content is in the content variable, right? Easy. Now, what's nice is from URL, it's just the same. So you can have a URL, example.com/sampledata.txt. So let's say, again, you have some sort of banking system, or you're working for a company who has just a lot of data on Amazon, let's say an S3 bucket or something. You can get the contents just as if it's a file, like as if it's a local file, right? And then you can do something with it. So really, really cool. Some advanced examples are reading a custom formatted file. Let's say, for example, so let's say we have a file called custom-data.txt, where each line is a record, okay, separated by the pipe, and the records themselves are separated by the new line character, right? So if the file looks like this, okay, you can use file get contents to read the file and process each line separately. So again, I'm not going to get too detailed on the code because you guys have access to this as well. It'll be in D2L. But file get contents, split the content into an array of records using the new line as the separator. So we use the explode function /n. That is our separator. So it breaks that apart into an array. And then we have the records as record. So we loop through each record and we check if it's not empty and we trim the record. So we skip any empty lines because obviously we want to have some sort of data, like, sanity check. And then once we get some data, we explode based on the pipe character, right? So that's how we split the field, which again passes us an array. So the fields becomes an array itself. And then we have parameter 0, parameter 1, parameter 2, and so on, right? So this reads the content of the file, splits it individually, and then further splits each record based on delimiter. So you can build your own little, custom interpreter, right? So why use file get contents? So it's convenient for reading an entire file into a single string and handle URLs, which is obviously great. And it's useful for web scraping, right? So let's say you're building a competitor to Google, right? You want to scrape the entire internet. So what do? You start with a website. Let's say you go to like CNN.com and you're checking for anything that has an Ahref link, right? And then you take those links and then you add that to a queue. So now you copy everything from CNN.com, the entire HTML source code, you save it locally, right? And now you've got like 30 different links. So those links now are added to a queue, and you go through each link, get the HTML, get more links. And so it kind of like as a spider, you eventually crawl the entire internet, right? So again, this is just a very rudimentary example. This is probably not how you build a web scraper that's going to be used in real world anymore, but it does work. Like you can build a basic web scraper. So you can also read JSON config files the same way. So again, get the contents. Now you're using JSON decode instead of encode, which then converts that back into an array. You can download a CSV file from our link. So if you've got a URL which contains a CSV file, again, file get contents, and you can then file put contents. And that's it. Simple, right? So you can already imagine, I was going to ask this question anyway, but what are the limitations when working with very large files, right? So what are the limitations, which is pretty much the same as what we talked about in the other one too, right? Yeah. High memory usage. Again, you don't want to read like a multi-gig file. It doesn't make sense, right? So any kind of performance issues, running out of memory, like it's just, all of the above, right? Okay. So checking file existence, readability, and other attributes. So what does all this mean? So before performing file operations, right, as you can imagine from what we've already learned, you want to check if a file exists, whether it's also readable or writable, and other attributes, right? This checks and prevents errors and ensures that the script has necessary permissions, right? Because let's say you're deploying a big system and you have to do a lot of stuff with the file, and you're gonna set it and forget it, right? So imagine you're launching your new business. If you're not checking to make sure errors are happening or catching errors, you're going to miss all the, like if you're supposed to have a log of all the visitors and you're not checking if the file is even writable or if it exists or whatnot, you might have launched and people are using your website for a month and you get nothing, right? So file exists is a built-in function from PHP that checks if a file or directory exists. So the name is kind of weird because it should be file or directory. It takes a file name and it returns true if the file or directory exists, right? Otherwise it returns false. And then you have is readable, which checks if the file is readable, i.e. if you have the permission to read the file, okay? Other useful functions, again, we're gonna quickly kind of blast through these, right? But they're very self-explanatory. Is writable, obviously checks if it's writable, right? Is executable. So again, you might have a .sh file on Linux or Unix, which is a .sh. You might lack the permission to execute, right? Is file. So checks if this is a file or a directory, right? Or not a directory. So use the distinguish between files and directories because you might be looping through an unknown file in a directory and you need to know, like, what is this file? Is it a directory? Is it a file? Is dir checks if the specified path is a directory. So you have is file and is directory. Again, same thing. So is dir path to directory is a directory, right? File type returns a type of the specified file. So outputs file or directory, other type depending on the file. Not so much is it a JPEG, is it a text file? It's the fact that is it a file or a directory, right? Then you have file size in bytes. So you get the file size back or false if it doesn't exist. And then real path is the absolute path of the specified file, right? So what is the difference between real, absolute, and relative path? Does anybody know? I'm sure by now you guys have had experience with that. So relative versus absolute path. Yeah, Omar's got it. Exactly from the root, right? Ayesha, what does it mean absolute though? The definition, not the word. We're looking for the definition, not just the fact that it's absolute. But yeah, look at Omar's example. Omar's example is perfect, right? So Okay, let's say a real world example, logging system check. So we've got, let's say, a logging system that writes logs to a log/system.log file. We want to ensure that the file exists. We want to verify its location using real path and check if it's writable before adding a new log entry. All these are like very good things to do before you obviously continue further, right? So quickly, just to check the code, we have a path, right? We check if it exists. We get the absolute path of the file, right? So get a real path, returns the absolute path, not just this little relative path over here. We check for readability and writability. So is readable and is writable. Yes, they are. Else if is readable, absolute path, then that's fine too. Else, whatever. And then else the log file doesn't exist, right? So all these checks and balances, the whole point is that we do all these checks and balances first, right? Before we do anything. So let's say this first question here, why is it necessary to check for file attributes before you perform an operation on it? I think you guys already know all the answers to that one, right? It's a pretty easy, why would I check? I just want to write to it or append to it. Why should I check? Yeah, it's pretty much to avoid errors. Yeah, it's 100%. There's no other reason why. Because what if you can't write to it, you might not want to even continue with the script at all, right? You might want to trigger an error. You might want to send an email to somebody, like an administrator, and say, hey, we have a huge error. We can't write to a file. You might want to send a text message to somebody, like a system administrator, to say, hey, you can't write these logs. Whatever the reason is, it's always good to check. Always assume everything is broken and don't trust anybody, right? So if you follow that in your coding life, it's a good way to write all the code, right? Assume everything is going to always break. Maybe hard drive is not going to exist. Maybe the path doesn't exist. Maybe the hard drive crashed. Exactly. Don't trust yourself either. There you go. You might be living in the matrix. Maybe you're not even who you are. Okay. So now file permissions and file handling of permission issues, right? It is deep, I know. It's not supposed to get that deep, but we got deep. So it is what it is, guys. So file permissions determine what operations can be performed, obviously, right? They control who can and can't read, write, execute, and all that stuff, just like we were saying. So again, permission levels, waiting for the wake up on the screen. It might happen, you don't know. We still have half an hour. So common permission levels, obviously, read, write, execute, right? They have a numerical value as well. But let's say, for example, here in PHP, there are these numeric file permissions. So changing permissions to a file to 0755 is actually read, write, and execute, right? So you can actually change the permissions on a file itself with this chmod example, right? So let's see if we've got, I can open up this php.net here. So, because people are going to obviously get stuck on what are these permissions, right? So let me see if I can show you guys. Let's go back for a second here. So permissions are basically this sort of number system, right? So you can either use the string version, but actually it won't work. Sorry, ignore what I said there. So there's a whole list of different permissions, right? That's the main thing you want to take away from here is the fact that there's Like for example, read and write for owner and nothing for everybody else. 0600. So you might have learned this in a previous sysadmin class. Let's see if we can quickly Google for you guys a file permissions chart with numbers. So you've got some chart here, right? So you probably learned this somewhere in the book, but this is a good example of what the heck you're looking at in terms of the numbers, right? So let's go down to, here we go. So read, write, execute is 7, right? Read, write without execute is 6. Read by itself is 5. 4 is, sorry, read and execute is 5. 4, 3, 2, 1. So this is kind of like your master chart of what you want to do. Yeah. So all the memories are flying back, right? So again, you're working with a file system, right? So the point is you're rebuilding this. So if we go back to our lecture today, we are now, because it is running on Linux and Unix, right? The server. In your case, it's not because it's on Windows, but again, that's a whole different topic. So you're setting the permission you want, which is whatever you decide, and then you can check it after to see if the change is made successfully, right? Then we have handling of permission issues. So we want to check permissions to see, let's say, for example, is it writable? Is it readable? Right? Verify the directory is accessible even. Then you want to change the ownership, right? Don't forget there's ownerships as well from your IT. So lots of different, I'm just looking at the chat. I'm getting distracted from you guys and your funny, you guys are getting very, very entertaining in the chat over here. So I'm gonna try to minimize the chat because it's getting interesting. Okay, so again, same thing. Study the example. It's very self-explanatory, right? You have a path to a file. We get the full path, and then we're just checking: is it readable? And then if not, we can change the permissions, verify the change was successful, and off we go, right? So anybody who's done the Linux stuff, what are the consequences of setting file permissions to 777? Who knows the answer to this? Yeah, Linux pretty much runs the world. So Windows is pretty uncommon. Yeah, so 777, like you guys have said, it grants read, write, execute to everyone, including the owner, group, and public users. So it's a serious security risk, obviously. But yeah, get to know and love Linux and Unix because that's pretty much runs the whole world. So like rarely are you gonna have a web server that's running on Windows, you know? Pretty unlikely. Okay. Guys, we're at slide 11 of 17. We're almost through. This has been a big one. There's a lot to cover in this lecture today. So let's talk about deleting and handling safely in PHP, right? Obviously deleting is pretty serious, right? Because if you delete, you've deleted, you don't want to really delete the wrong thing. So handle cautiously to prevent accidental loss. So in PHP, there's a function called unlink, which is used to delete a file. And then rmdir is used to delete the directory. It's self-explanatory, right? So unlink, I don't believe will delete the directory. So if there's files and directories there, it'll leave the directories alone. But rmdir, it removes an empty directory. So it must be empty for it to actually remove. I think these are all there just for safety, right? Because obviously you can easily make a script with a loop. And if you make the wrong mistake, very easily you can blow away the entire directory, right? So there's a lot of help that PHP does to prevent you from messing up big time. And then there's scandir, which lists the directory contents, right? So let's look at the syntax. So you've got a directory, And then you've got an optional sort order of the files. So if you want to sort it by ascending or descending, like in case you have a huge directory for whatever reason. And then you've got an optional resource context. So let's see what this looks like, right? So list files in the current directory. I say scandir dot, because again, think back to Linux and Unix, dot is the current directory, right? I say print our files, and then it outputs an array. So now files actually comes back with an array of dot, dot, dot. That's also in the directory as well. Index.php, data.txt, and backup, which I'm assuming is a directory, right? So file deletion syntax. So again, we've got a file name. We say, first we check, does it exist? And if it exists, we unlink it. And then we confirm it's been deleted, or we output to the screen rather that it's been deleted. Otherwise, the file doesn't exist anyway, so don't even bother unlinking it, right? And then removing the empty directory is as simple as saying that's the directory. We check, is it a directory? And then we check the count of scandir, which we did above here. If it's equal to 2, right, we have the current directory and parent directory. And then, because obviously if the count is, yeah, if you do a sudo rmrf root, you will pass the class 100%. And I'm joking. Don't hold me to that. But yeah, because if the count goes to 3 or more, we know we have other files or something in that directory, right? So 2 tells us it's empty, right? And then we can call rmdir on the directory name, and then we can confirm it's been deleted, right? So safely is a key word here today. So before performing that operation, you want to ensure, files exist, is a directory. You want to make sure the script even has the permission to delete, because you might not even have the permission as much as you want to, right? Make sure the directory is empty. So deleting temp files using scandir. So in a real-world application, temporary files might be created and stored during user sessions, right? So it's essential to delete these to maintain storage hygiene. So again, if somebody logs in and you're storing some basic data on them, maybe the color of, maybe the theme, maybe you want a dark theme or a light theme, or I don't know, whatever you're storing about them. Eventually, if you have millions of users, that data is going to just amass to a massive quantity of useless data, right? And you're going to pay for that storage somewhere. So it's always a good idea to say, for example, put a business rule in that says delete temporary files older than 1 day, right? So this way, regardless of, you don't have to keep track of users, anything older than a day, bye-bye, right? So you've got your directory, you scan your directory, and then you say for each file in the files array, I get the path, I check if it's a file, and I check then with this little crafty function here in seconds, am I older than a day? If I am older than a day, then I simply unlink that file path, right? And then off it goes, and it's been unlinked. So let's ask some questions. What are some risks associated with file deletion in PHP? If you guys have done this in other systems as well, right? So any sort of deletion, really. So think of not the obvious one that I just talked about earlier, which is like obviously deleting the wrong file, right? So any examples where other risks for deleting operations are? So that's a lot of, okay, security. So Ricky, so what do you mean by security? Yep, those are good examples, but what do you mean by security, Ricky? Like in more detail. Deleting a file when it's being read or written to is a good example too. Yeah. Because now imagine somebody's reading and writing it, and then you're trying to delete it, then you got a problem there. So In the case of a storage organization for sure, even for the security, like going back to what if somehow that file ends up in a different directory and then it blows away other files or directories that it's not intended, right? Or security vulnerabilities. So, deleting is pretty much deleting. Like it's there's no going back from it, right? It's really, really important. So when you're working with unlink and deleting files, you want to be 100% sure. It's better to check twice, 3 times, do all kinds of checks and balances before you delete because there's no going back. Okay. So directory handling and traversing in PHP. So again, you've got some great PHP functions that will help you with all this, right? Built-in PHP functions, opening, reading, closing. Open dir opens a directory. Read dir reads a directory. Rewind dir resets directory to the beginning. And close dir closes the directory. So let's look at some of these as an example, right? Opening and reading a directory. We just say open dir, path to directory. If not false, right? I can get a file, and I get the file name, and then I close directory. So listing files in a directory, except for dot and dot dot, obviously. Again, same thing, right? File, if it's equal to this or that, we ignore it. Otherwise, we just simply say, what is it, right? Are you expected to memorize all these functions? Yes, every word I say and all functions. I'm kidding. But you need to know they exist, right? The main takeaway is you need to know they exist, and you need to know if I'm working with files and directories. Yeah, in real life, like there's no way you're gonna know all this. There's just no way. But you need to know that the tool exists, right? You need to know that php.net exists, and look at all these file functions over here, or different functions, right? You need to know that there's an ability to delete, there's an ability to write, update, append, whatever, right? So again, it's knowing the tools exist, but the difference in pay grade, if you're a junior programmer, you're going to spend 1 or 2 hours maybe looking at what is the right function, right? And that's why you're getting paid a smaller amount than, let's say, for example, a senior developer who knows it off the back of his head because he's been doing it his whole life, right? So that's the difference between making a lot of money, like Lambo money, or making just, like Toyota Corolla money, right? So knowing all the tools and being really good and being efficient at it is the difference between, pay grade. A lot of mistakes, like a junior programmer might make some mistakes on simple things, like you're not checking. Bugatti money, I don't think is in PHP. I don't think PHP can get you there, but not quite. It might, maybe like a used Bugatti, but not maybe not the new one. So okay, so handling nested directories. So you can use recursive functions to iterate through these subdirectories, right? Yeah, Facebook was PHP. Like I said, there is some people can. It's definitely not. You can buy Bugattis with PHP, it's just more uncommon, let's say. Yeah, there's only 1 or 2 Morning Zuckerbergs out there. So again, you can recursively list the directories, right? Again, I'm not going to go through all the code because you're not going to remember this anyway. You have to practice this. The better tool here is take this, what you see, and then just practice it, right? So deleting a non-empty directory. So recursively directed to deletion is also important to note too. Again, that's how you would sort of do it. So let's talk about the difference between opendir and scandir. Again, more from the knowledge perspective, right? So both of them are used to read directories, but they differ in terms of functionality. So opendir opens a directory handle, and you need to use readdir to read the entries one by one, right? So it's suitable for iterating through directories where more control is needed. Scandir, on the other hand, returns an array of directory contents. It reads all the files at once and is useful when you need to quickly list all the files without additional operations. So I'm going to skip the questions here because we're getting low on time and we are still 4 slides away. So there's a lot, Bugattis don't buy themselves, right? We got a lot to learn. So file upload and processing. Now this is a whole different beast too. So how do you handle file uploads in PHP, right? There's single file uploads, there's multi-file uploads. And what are they, right? You might take somebody who takes, if you've gone to a website where you're uploading only one file at a time, that's different from a multi-file upload, right? So how do you set up a form? How do you handle all this? So we'll quickly run through this too. So in PHP and HTML, you're going to use the form element, if you guys have ever done that, right? You're going to use post, because you can't do get to do a file. You're going to set the encoding type to multi-part form, right? And then you have to include an input file to allow somebody to select the file on their browser or their phone or wherever they are, right? Then there is the files superglobal, which is an array that stores the file properties. So that's going to be something when you process the file and take it in. Single file upload handling in PHP is just simply move uploaded file to move it from a temporary storage to a desired location, right? So let's say you want to have the images into an images folder. That's how you do that. And then you might want to rename, right? Because let's say you trust everybody to upload a file and it's called like house.jpg. Well, what happens when the next person uploads house.jpg, right? So you have to give these files a unique name internally for you, and not rely on the person uploading the file name. So now let's kind of dive in a little bit because there's a lot to cover. So the files superglobal is an array that stores information about the uploaded file. Think of next week we're going to be covering cookie, session, but think of post and get. Those are also an array superglobal, right? So the uploaded file array, which is files, will contain an array of the name, the type, the temporary name, any error codes, if any, and the size in bytes. So if I uploaded example.jpg, it's going to tell me it's an image/JPEG, which is the MIME type of the file. The temporary name, which is the temporary file location, that because it has to be somewhere. It's not just in, Oxygen. So there is a file directory where this file exists right now, but it's temporary, right? Any errors and the size, right? So a single file upload example. I'm just going to really quickly open up VS Code so you guys are not looking at black and white code here. It's just a little bit nicer to look at. Here we go. So I'm going to share my screen. So let's look at VS Code, for example, here. Okay. So what do we got? We got the form, upload.php. That's where it's posting to, right? Easy enough. So the whole form is this. That's your entire HTML. Super easy, right? We have an input file and then a submit button, obviously, to hit the thing to make it go. And then on the PHP side, we check, there's a server superglobal. We make sure the request method is post. You don't have to do this. Again, this is just an example. We have a target directory where we want the file to go. We have an original file name, which we take from the files thing. We give it a new file name. And this, again, is just your own logic. It doesn't have to be this. The whole point is we just replace the file name, right? It could be based on like a timestamp or whatever. We have a target file. So anyway, let's look at this. We're going to echo out the original file name that they uploaded, the renamed file, the file type that was uploaded, which is like image/JPEG or text or CSV, the temp location and the file size. And then the last key piece of the puzzle is you move it from the temporary directory to the uploads directory. So you say move uploaded file from this temp directory to the target file, which is the directory I want it to go into, right? That includes the directory and file name, by the way. So it's not just /uploads, which is over here. You also want to include the file name and the extension. So this target file would be, for example, uploads/blah.jpg, right? That would be the target file. Okay. And if it's successful, then you're in luck. It's going to show a little success. If not, then you've got a problem. Okay, so let's go back to here. Handling multi-part file uploads. Again, let's take a look at this in a little bit nicer form. Now we have a multi-upload PHP. The enc type is multi-part. Okay. Now, this is interesting. You have to have this set up as an array and multiple, right? And then that way you can actually work with it in a multiple setting. I'm just going to put the chat here in case some messages. If you don't move the temp file, does it automatically get removed on script exit? I don't know off the top of my head, and somebody will have to check that for me on Google. But yeah, the temp folder is set by PHP on that settings somewhere. You can change the temp folder. But yeah, if it gets removed or not, I don't know. This is one of those examples we talked about earlier where you're not going to know everything. Simply, there's just too many functions in PHP, too much nuance. But if somebody Googles it, we'll know quickly. But yeah, so how do we handle multi-uploads, right? So let's say I selected multiple like JPEGs, right? And not one by one. So all we're doing now is we're doing a for each loop into the name as key file name, right? So now the code is basically the same, with the difference being the key in the array, right? So I'm doing the same thing. And this is a lot easier, right? So rather than forcing somebody to one by one upload files, and it's painful, they have to go back, upload the next file, go back, upload the next file. With this method, you can just select a whole bunch of files and off you go, right? Like it makes the functionality so much easier. So in terms of file validation techniques, you want to do a check on the file size because you want to, let's say you don't want somebody to upload a 5 gig file. You want to restrict images to maybe 5 megabytes. So you can do that with file size check. You can do a MIME content type or file finfo file to verify the MIME type. Why do this? And I'll tell you in a second. Because I can create a file on my computer and I could call it .jpeg, but in reality, it's a text file, right? So MIME type is actually will verify that a JPEG is in fact a real JPEG, right? And the file extension validates the extension, right? So let's see, somebody pasted Omar, according to Stack Overflow, it saves it at the path specified, but deletes it after the script is done executing. Okay. Yeah, I can't ensure correctness either, but I think that sounds about right. So yeah, it could be. Let's go with that for now, and we'll see. So file upload with validation. We're going to copy this and put this into here. So again, the same. Yeah, pretty much always move your temp uploads, right? You want to, because once the script is done with it, that file is done. So to validate our file now, we have our nice little check and balance here. So we're going to validate. We have an array of valid file types. So you, again, as the business owner or the programmer, are deciding the business rules. I only want to accept JPEG, PNG, GIF, and PDF, right? And if I said GIF wrong, then too bad, because I've always said it as GIF. It could be GIF, it could be GIF. All are correct. So if it's not in the array of the allowable file types, we're going to die and tell the user that it's invalid, right? I am right. So it is GIF or whatever. Die, if you see it's equivalent to exit, but die in PHP is, I'll show you here. Well, it doesn't really say much, unfortunately, but it just terminates the script, essentially, right? It's very serious. Yeah. So GIF is gift without the T. Yeah, GIF, gift, GIF. There you go. Okay, so going back to here, we validate the file size. Obviously, we want to have a maximum file size. That's how we validate it, and it's in bytes. So don't forget to check in bytes. And then we move the validated file. So then if everything is good, we move it from our temp directory to our actual directory. So I'm glad we got to the bottom of this as well. If anything you've learned today, the GIF versus GIF is the most important part. That's the takeaway. That determines if you're a good programmer or not. So, what other security measures can you implement to secure file uploads? Does anybody know? What other security measures? Size limit, yeah. What else? Anything else specifically? What about, is there a way to analyze the files that are being uploaded? What do you mean by analyze? Because analyze itself is a business rule, right? Try to detect text that is inside not a script. Like another one you could be is maybe the file name has some weird characters, right? Maybe it's a different, it's not English. Like it might have Cyrillic or whatever in it. Date and time validation, format, yeah. Um, again, think of, directories, right? You want to make sure the directory has permissions for upload and prevent access to the directory. So let's say you're moving it to an uploaded directory, like a slash images. You might not want to have slash images be publicly accessible, right? Because if you go there right now, you might get a list of all the images. So you'll give everybody inadvertently access to everything that's been uploaded, right? So those are some of the things you want to do. Okay. We've got like 3 slides and like 5 minutes. So let's get through this really quickly. So obviously cross-platform is going to be a big one. This is something you might want to read on your own, but the difference between Windows and Linux are backslashes, right? So Windows uses backslashes as directory separators, while Linux uses forward slashes. Line endings, Windows uses carriage return and line feed, which is the /r/n, whereas Linux is /n. File permissions, Linux has more granular, and case sensitivity is case sensitive versus Windows is not. So Windows is kind of like a, no problemo, Wild West. So read the best practices for file handling, right? I want to kind of get through some more of the important lectures, but how do you handle different line endings, that kind of thing. Let's skip to additional file handling functions. Just again, to have your knowledge pretty versatile. So the takeaway here is today and this week, remember to go through all this, right? There's a lot to cover here. But read a single character from a file, write a single character to a file. Let's see, file end time returns the last modified time. This is useful. File owner returns the user ID of the file owner. Again, in the access control and systems, this is good to know. So let's see here quickly, slide 16. So there's more constants even for file handling. So let's walk through some of the more important ones, right? So there was lock-ex, which we talked about. There's file append, which we talked about. Set the pointer to the beginning of the file. Sometimes you want to do some manipulation. You want to move the pointer. So that's how you would do that. Seek current, set the file pointer to the current position plus the offset. Seek end sets the file pointer to the end of the file minus the offset. Some path info stuff. There's a lot. Like there's no way we're gonna get through this in one lecture. But the main thing was getting through, especially the file uploads. So let me just quickly go to the last slide here. So this is kind of a summary, which is good. We went through a lot of this stuff, but more importantly, what I want you guys to do is practice tasks. So this is where all of the things from this lecture slides are going to come into play, right? So this is not for marks. This is, again, just for your own benefit to become a better programmer, to buy that Bugatti. So if you practice, you might get the Bugatti. If you don't, you might be only able to buy a Lambo or something, right? So that's the difference in the practice tasks. So create a script for yourself that opens a directory and lists all the files with the absolute paths. Ignore files that start with a dot. That's a little bit of a challenge. Yeah, practice for the car. Create a PHP script that reads a CSV file and converts its contents into an HTML table, because that's a cool little challenge, because CSV is different from HTML, obviously. So, how do you do that? Lessons from today. Thank you, Omar, for this this nice summary. Memorize everything. Always move temp files. Pronounce GIF correctly, not GIF, GIF, GIF. And you'll have Lambo Bugatti. But if you don't do the practice tasks, you only have Lambo money. If you do the practice, you have Bugatti money. So that's the key, right? Then create a log file and use file put contents to append log entries and timestamps when visit the page, right? Develop a script that uploads multiple files to the server, renames each file, and checks any upload errors. This is a really cool one. If any of these you want to practice, it would be this one, because file uploads are really key. And that's something you really want to practice. And then fseek and fget to read a large text file character by character, okay? And implement a recursive function to delete non-empty directory. If you do this task 6, be very careful. Don't delete everything you've already had on your computer. So add class code for today, guys, was Y6EN. I'll paste it here. Okay, let me just look at the questions here. Do we have a quiz today? That's going to be in your lab, not the lecture, I think. So, okay, add class code. So we have to create CSV file as well to complete these tasks. These tasks, like I said, is not a requirement for the class. This is for you to be a better programmer, right? To get that Bugatti money. So it's a lot of work, but I think you guys can probably do this all 6 in about an hour. Like it's not super difficult. You've got a lot of documentation. All of these slides are there. And otherwise, yeah, I think you guys should be pretty good. So good luck. And otherwise, we will see you guys next week. So all the best, guys. Thanks for the great class. You guys definitely got some homework to do. If there is a quiz in the lecture, sorry, somebody did mention there is a quiz. So I will enable the quiz. My apologies for that. I'll enable the quiz, but I think you guys have until later on today, I think, to finish it, right? So I'll check with Mazir. Sorry, I don't know the details of the quiz because he usually starts that. So, but I will get that up and running. So keep an eye out for the quiz, and we'll go from there, guys. Quiz code, I don't know. I don't know that, guys. Let me take a look here. You might have to bug Mazir for this one. So somebody will know more than me about this for sure on the quiz side. So when you enable a quiz, okay, let me quickly enable the quiz for you guys. And see. So we are in week 5, I believe, correct? So hang on one second. It's not on Brightspace, huh? Yeah, I don't actually see it. Let me open up this quiz ad class and see what we got here. Okay. Pause my sharing. Yeah, I think you guys are right with Mazir enabling them. I'm just going to quickly find out here. Yeah, I'll post it to D2L. Definitely, definitely. I'll talk to Mazir and see, because he couldn't make it today. So,
Sir, how long do we have to do
yeah,
it?
sorry guys for the mix-up on the quiz, but I will get that sorted. And let's see today. I see a quiz 3. Did you guys do quiz 3? Quiz 3 has been done. Okay. Let's see. Okay, I've got it here. Quiz 5. Hold on, hold on. I can start. Okay, guys, this is the quiz code. Oh, quiz 4 or quiz 5? Quiz 4. Okay. Good you guys told me that. So hang on one second. Quiz 4 is MVC. So start quiz. This is your quiz code. I'm going to. Okay, so that should be your quiz code for today. Sorry for the mix-ups. Thank you guys for the patience. And let me know if it looks good. Working? Beautiful. Okay, very good news, very good news. Okay, guys, good luck on the quiz. All the best. See you guys next week, okay? Take care.